The phone call lasted less than 3 minutes. It was routine, unremarkable, and utterly forgettable. The kind of brief connection a husband and wife might share 1,000 times over the course of a life together. On the evening of October 12th, 2011, it was the last time anyone ever heard from Julian Croft. He had told his wife, Sarah, that he was about an hour away from their suburban home. He was driving back from a final site inspection on a new commercial development, a project that had consumed much of his time for the better part of a year. His voice, she later recalled, carried the familiar weight of a long day, but was otherwise normal. He mentioned that the sunset over the Cascade foothills was spectacular. He said he was thinking of pulling over at the Northridge Vista Point to take a photograph before the light was completely gone. It was a casual comment, the sort of thing an architect with a passion for landscape photography might say without a second thought. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Sarah Croft began to feel the first subtle prickle of unease. Julian was punctual, almost to a fault. A delay of this length, without a follow-up call or text, was deeply out of character. By the third hour, unease had curdled into genuine fear. She called his cell phone repeatedly. Each call went directly to voicemail, the electronic tones sounding more final and unnerving with every attempt. She contacted the local sheriff's department just after 10 p.m. to report him overdue. The initial response from law enforcement was measured. Julian Croft was an adult. He was not known to have any medical conditions that might cause disorientation. The deputies who took the report suggested he might have stopped for a late dinner or decided to stay overnight near the work site to get an early start the next day, though even they conceded it was unusual he had not called. They assured Sarah they would patrol his likely route, the winding and often desolate State Route 542. They took down the description of his vehicle, a dark gray 2009 Ford Explorer. They noted the license plate number and promised to keep an eye out. The following morning, with no word from Julian, and his phone still routing to voicemail, the situation escalated. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Department officially classified him as a missing person. His photo and vehicle information were disseminated to neighboring jurisdictions and state patrol units. His colleagues at the architectural firm in Bellingham were stunned. They confirmed he had left the worksite, located in a sparsely populated area near the town of Maple Falls, at approximately 5:15 p.m. He had seemed in good spirits, pleased with the progress that had been made that day. No one he worked with could recall him mentioning any alternative plans. He had spoken about heading straight home. He had a meeting scheduled for the following morning he was not expected to miss. Nothing in his professional life suggested a reason for an unannounced deviation from his routine. Investigators began by reconstructing his final day. It had been, by all accounts, completely ordinary. He had attended meetings in the city that morning, driven to the remote construction site in the early afternoon, and conducted his inspection. He had spoken with the site foreman, signed off on some paperwork, and departed as planned. The route from the site back to his home was straightforward. It involved traveling west on Route 542, a highway known for its scenic beauty and its long, isolated stretches. The Northridge Vista Point, the place he had mentioned to his wife, was a well-known scenic overlook directly on this route. For 2 full days, the search yielded nothing. Sheriff's deputies and state troopers drove the route multiple times. They checked the parking lots of motels and restaurants along the way. A helicopter was deployed to scan the heavily forested ravines that bordered the highway, searching for any sign of a vehicle that might have gone off the road. The search area was vast and challenging. The Cascade foothills were a dense tapestry of Douglas fir and western hemlock, a wilderness that could easily swallow a vehicle whole. Investigators operated under the primary assumption that Julian had been involved in a traffic accident. Then, on the afternoon of October 15th, 3 days after he vanished, a park ranger on a routine patrol made a discovery. There, parked neatly in a designated spot at the Northridge Vista Point, was a dark gray Ford Explorer. The license plate was a match for Julian Croft's. The vehicle was not wrecked. It was not abandoned in a hurry. It was parked perfectly parallel to the curb, centered in its space as if the driver had taken care to position it just so. From the outside, the scene was one of complete tranquility. The ranger who found the SUV reported that all the doors were locked. He peered through the windows. On the passenger seat, in plain view, was a leather briefcase. On the center console sat a smartphone. There were no immediate signs of a disturbance, no broken glass, no indication of a struggle. Detectives were dispatched to the scene immediately. The area around the Vista Point was cordoned off. The discovery of the vehicle was a major breakthrough, but it only deepened the mystery. It answered the question of where Julian had gone, but it raised far more troubling questions about what had happened to him there. The Vista Point itself was a small, paved semicircle carved out of the mountainside, offering a panoramic view of the valley below. It was bordered by a low stone wall. Beyond the wall, the terrain dropped away sharply into a steep, wooded incline. Investigators processed the vehicle with meticulous care. A locksmith was called to open the doors without causing damage. The interior was exactly as the ranger had described it, orderly and undisturbed. The keys were not in the ignition, nor were they anywhere else inside the vehicle. Julian's wallet was found inside the briefcase. It contained his driver's license, credit cards, and over $200 in cash. His laptop, also in the briefcase, was untouched. The smartphone on the console was his. Its battery was dead. Forensic examiners dusted the interior and exterior of the Explorer for fingerprints. They found numerous prints belonging to Julian, his wife, and their children, which was expected. They found no unidentified prints of any value. There was no blood, no hair, no foreign fibers, nothing to suggest a second person had been in the car, let alone that a violent struggle had taken place. The gas tank was more than 3/4 full. The vehicle's odometer reading was consistent with the mileage from the construction site to the Vista Point. Everything suggested Julian had driven directly there, parked his car, and then vanished. The dead smartphone was taken back to the crime lab. Technicians managed to charge it and access its data. The last outgoing call was the one he had made to his wife. There were no subsequent calls, texts, or data usage. The phone's location services showed its last connection to the network had been from a cell tower whose coverage area included the Northridge Vista Point. A massive ground search of the area surrounding the overlook was launched. Search and rescue teams, some with K-9 units, fanned out from the parking lot. They scoured the steep forested terrain below the stone wall. They rappelled down cliff faces and combed through the dense undergrowth. For days they searched. The weather turned, bringing with it the cold, persistent rain typical of a Pacific Northwest autumn. The conditions hampered the search effort, making the steep ground slick and treacherous. The dogs failed to pick up a definitive scent trail leading away from the parking area. One crucial item was noted as missing from the vehicle: Julian's professional-grade DSLR camera. He was a serious hobbyist photographer, and his camera bag, which he almost always kept in his car, was gone. This seemed to support the idea that he had stopped, as he told his wife, to take a photograph. But this detail created its own puzzle. If his intention was simply to step out for a few minutes to capture the sunset, why had he locked the car? And why would he take his keys with him, only to leave his wallet and phone behind? It was a series of actions that did not logically cohere. Investigators explored the possibility that he had fallen. Perhaps he had climbed over the low stone wall to get a better, unobstructed shot of the valley. He could have lost his footing in the fading light and tumbled down the steep embankment. The search teams focused intensely on this scenario. They spent days covering the area directly below the Vista Point. They found nothing, no sign of disturbed earth, no broken branches, no scraps of clothing. They found no camera, and, most importantly, they found no trace of Julian Croft. The search was eventually scaled back, then officially suspended after 2 weeks of fruitless effort. The wilderness had yielded no clues. The case file remained open, but active leads had evaporated. The investigation transitioned from a search and rescue operation to a long-term missing persons case. Detectives turned their focus back to Julian's life, searching for any hidden stressor that might explain his disappearance. They interviewed his family, friends, and colleagues in exhaustive detail. They were looking for anything: financial trouble, marital problems, a secret life that could provide a motive for him to either run away or be targeted. What they found was a portrait of a stable, successful, and well-liked man. Julian and Sarah Croft had been married for 15 years and had 2 children. Friends described their marriage as strong and happy. There was no evidence of infidelity. Financially, the Crofts were secure. Julian was a partner at his firm. They had a mortgage, but no unusual debt. A thorough review of their bank accounts and Julian's credit history showed no red flags, no sudden cash withdrawals, and no unusual transactions leading up to his disappearance. His colleagues described him as a dedicated and talented architect. The project he was overseeing was demanding, and he had been working long hours, but no one reported him seeming unusually stressed or overwhelmed. He was, by all accounts, a calm and level-headed professional. The theory that he had staged a voluntary disappearance began to seem less and less likely. People who choose to abandon their lives typically make preparations. They liquidate assets, create distance from their families, or leave some kind of trail, however faint. Julian Croft had done none of these things. His digital footprint was equally mundane. His emails and computer files revealed nothing but work-related correspondence and family photos. His social media presence was minimal. There was no hidden life waiting to be discovered on a hard drive. The investigation had reached a complete impasse. The physical evidence at the scene pointed away from foul play, yet the logic of the situation made an accident or voluntary disappearance seem equally improbable. Every potential explanation was contradicted by a key piece of evidence. If it was an accident, where was he? The search had been extensive. It seemed unlikely that a fall from the vista point would leave absolutely no trace. If it was a voluntary act, why leave his money and phone? Why stage it in such a bizarre and remote location? And where had he gone from there, with no vehicle and no resources? If it was foul play, how was it accomplished so flawlessly? An abduction or murder at a public, if isolated, vista point, without a single sign of a struggle seemed almost impossible. The car was locked, and the most valuable items were left behind, which argued against a simple robbery. Months turned into a year. The case grew cold. Julian's family hired a private investigator who re-interviewed witnesses and went over the case files. The investigator came to the same frustrating conclusions as the sheriff's department. There were no answers to be found. The media attention faded, as it always does. The story of the missing architect became a piece of local lore, a cautionary tale whispered about the beautiful but lonely roads of the Cascade foothills. The gray Ford Explorer was eventually returned to his grieving family. Years passed. No body was ever found. No new evidence ever surfaced. His bank accounts remained untouched. His credit cards were never used. Julian Croft had driven to a scenic overlook on a clear autumn evening and had, for all intents and purposes, ceased to exist. Music investigators and amateur sleuths were left with only theories, each attempting to reconcile the deeply contradictory facts of the case. Each theory provided a potential narrative, but each one frayed at the edges when held up against the known evidence. The first and most persistent theory was that of a planned disappearance. Proponents of this idea argued that the scene at the Vista Point was staged. Julian Croft, they suggested, wanted to start a new life. He drove to the overlook, a place he knew would eventually be found, and parked the car neatly to avoid the appearance of an accident. In this scenario, he locked the car, taking only his keys and camera, and was met by a waiting accomplice. Leaving his wallet and phone behind was a deliberate act of misdirection, designed to make investigators believe he had met with foul play or had an accident, thus delaying any search for him personally. This theory accounted for the locked car and the missing keys. It explained the lack of a struggle and the pristine condition of the scene. It suggested a man who had planned his escape with cold, calculated precision. However, the arguments against this theory were powerful. First and foremost was the complete lack of motive. Detectives had found no secret life, no overwhelming debt, no affair, no terminal illness, none of the classic catalysts for such a drastic act. His life appeared to be exactly what it seemed, stable and content. Furthermore, successfully disappearing in the modern world is exceptionally difficult. To have never accessed his funds, never contacted an old acquaintance, and never left a single digital trace for years on end would require a level of discipline and planning that seemed almost superhuman. There was no evidence he possessed a secret source of funds to finance a new life. The second major theory centered on foul play. This theory itself branched into two possibilities: a random act of violence or a targeted attack. The idea of a random attack suggested that Julian was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He stopped to take a photo and encountered a predator. Perhaps someone saw his expensive camera and attempted a robbery. A struggle could have ensued away from the car, leaving no evidence behind. The assailant could have overpowered Julian, taken his camera and car keys, and then locked the car to delay its discovery, perhaps out of some strange impulse or a clumsy attempt to cover their tracks. But this scenario struggled to explain why the wallet, cash, laptop, and smartphone were all left behind. Most opportunistic criminals would have taken everything of value. The act of locking the car also seemed odd for a panicked robber. Why not simply flee the scene? The alternative, a targeted attack, was also considered. In this version, someone who knew Julian's route lay in wait for him at the Vista Point. They knew he had a passion for photography and might be tempted to stop there at sunset. They abducted him, leaving the scene clean to mislead the investigation. This explained the lack of a struggle more effectively, as an ambush could have been swift and overwhelming. But it required a motive, and just as with the voluntary disappearance theory, investigators could find no one who wished Julian Croft harm. He had no business dealings that were contentious, no known enemies, no personal disputes. The targeted abduction theory provided a how but was completely missing a why. The third theory was misadventure, an accident of a kind the search parties had failed to uncover. The Northridge Vista Point was beautiful, but the surrounding wilderness was unforgiving. It was possible Julian had wandered much farther from the road than anyone suspected. Perhaps he saw a unique photographic opportunity, an animal, a specific vantage point, and pursued it. Venturing deep into the woods, he could have become disoriented as darkness fell, gotten lost, and ultimately succumbed to the elements. Or he could have fallen into a hidden crevasse or an old mine shaft, of which there were a few in the region, his body concealed from searchers. This theory explained his disappearance without needing to invent complex conspiracies or hidden motives. It was a simple, tragic accident. It accounted for the missing camera, which he would have had with him. The primary flaw in this theory, however, remained the locked car. It was the detail that stubbornly refused to fit. People who step out of their vehicle for a brief, impromptu moment rarely take the time to lock it, especially in a remote area. And if he had done so, why take the keys but leave his phone and wallet? If he was planning a longer hike, it seemed more likely he would have taken his phone. Moreover, the canine units had not picked up any scent trail leading away from the parking lot into the deep woods. While not infallible, the dog's failure to find a track was a significant piece of evidence against the theory that he had simply walked away. Finally, there was the fourth category of theories, which encompassed more esoteric possibilities. These included a sudden and severe medical event, such as a stroke or aneurysm, that caused a profound state of confusion. In this state, he might have locked his car out of a confused habit and wandered into the wilderness, his actions no longer governed by logic. Another possibility was a sudden psychological break, a fugue state where he lost his sense of identity. Such an event could lead an individual to wander away from their life with no memory of who they were. This would be a form of voluntary disappearance, but one that was unwitting and tragic rather than planned. These medical and psychological theories were impossible to either prove or disprove. They offered an explanation for the bizarre and illogical nature of the scene he left behind. His actions would not have to make sense because he would not have been in a rational state of mind. Yet, like all the others, these theories were pure speculation. Julian had no history of mental illness or any medical condition that would predispose him to such an event. They were explanations born of desperation, attempts to fill a void where facts should be. Each theory was a path that led to a dead end. Every attempt to construct a coherent narrative of Julian Croft's final moments collapsed under the weight of a single contradictory detail. The locked car argued against an accident. The abandoned valuables argued against a robbery. The lack of motive argued against a voluntary disappearance or a targeted abduction. The case file of Julian Croft remains open to this day. It is a collection of facts that refuse to form a story. It is a testament to the unsettling truth that a person can simply be there one moment and gone the next, leaving behind a puzzle with no solution. The Northridge Vista Point is still there. Tourists and locals still pull over to admire the same view that Julian Croft likely saw in the final moments before he disappeared. The low stone wall offers no answers. The vast, silent forest stretching out below keeps its secrets. The mystery hinges on a series of unanswered questions. What happened in the minutes or hours after he ended that final, ordinary phone call to his wife? Why were his most valuable possessions left in his car but his keys and his camera taken? Why was the car, his last known location, locked and left in such a tidy, deliberate state? And most importantly, where did he go? Did he walk into the woods? Was he driven away by another? Or did he meet an end so swift and final that it left not a single trace for the world to find? The answers to these questions vanished with Julian Croft himself, lost to the fading light of an autumn evening on a lonely mountain road. The silence that followed his last phone call has never been broken. What do you think really happened to Julian Croft? Was it a planned escape, a tragic accident, or something more sinister? Share your theory in the comments. And if you enjoy unresolved mysteries like this, like the video and subscribe for more.